Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
Let's dive right into this explainer and unpack how Latin America's fourth largest economy is literally having its best year and its worst year at the exact same time. It's wild. When you look at the numbers, you're staring at a country running two totally different stories at once, one written by households and one written by the state, and they are pulling in violently opposite directions.
And this brilliantly illustrates our starting point, the cafe versus the chaos. We've got two completely opposite realities coexisting on the exact same streets. Picture this. You're sitting in a beautiful cafe in Medellin. Coffee just had its best year since 1996. The peso is actually strong, and unemployment, it's at record lows. But then you step outside, and this very same country just got branded a rogue drug nation by the United States. Its credit rating got slashed to junk, and the government and central bank are flat out refusing to sit in the same room. So which reality is real? The uncomfortable answer is, well, both of them. To untangle this crazy contradiction, we're going to peel back the layers systematically. We'll hit the spending boom, coffee beats the barrel, the shadow economy, the institutional meltdown, and finally, the Washington shock.
Starting off with Section 1, the spending boom. We really have to start with the genuine good news here. Colombia's GDP expanded a super resilient 2.6% in 2025. After basically stalling out in 2023, the economy finally got up off the floor. But here's the catch. This recovery was completely driven by households just going out and buying things. It wasn't factories, it wasn't construction, or a wave of new investments. Private consumption surged to a massive 76.7% of GDP. Essentially, 3/4 of the entire economy is just regular folks spending money.
Now, you might be wondering where that spending money is actually coming from. Well, look at this number, $12 billion. That represents the total remittances sent back home in 2025. This is the secret sauce keeping the economy warm, right? But it's fueled by a really harsh reality. An estimated 1.5 million people emigrated over the last 3 years. So the economy is basically being propped up by its own diaspora. It's one of the healthiest looking lines on Colombia's books, for sure, but it fundamentally only exists because people left to seek stability somewhere else. So the crucial point here is that while this spending boom is very, very real, it's resting on a seriously cracking foundation. Over half the workforce is operating completely off the books. We're talking 13 million informal workers compared to just 10.3 million formal ones. The lights are on, the consumption engine is roaring, but it's being carried by a workforce with zero benefits and no safety net. And let's be real, an economy simply cannot shop its way to long-term prosperity without solid, formal investment.
Let's move right into Section 2, coffee beats the barrel. This is where we see how a generational agricultural triumph created a plot twist literally nobody saw coming. For decades, petroleum was the absolute, undisputed king of Colombia's exports. But in 2025, that dynamic completely flipped.
For the first time in modern history, the bean actually beat the barrel. Driven by fantastic weather, plantation renewals, and just sky-high global prices, coffee exports jumped nearly 80% in value to $3.67 billion. At the exact same time, fuel and extractive exports dropped almost 18%. Now, this is what we call democratized wealth. Coffee money flows directly to hundreds of thousands of small farms all across the country, whereas oil money typically stays concentrated with a handful of companies and the government.
But as coffee spiked, that vital load-bearing wall of oil began to crumble. Colombia's proven oil reserves have actually fallen by over 400 million barrels since their peak in 2013, dropping down to 1.944 billion in 2025. To put that into perspective, at the current pace of production, this leaves the country with fewer than 8 years of reserves. The nation is quite literally staring at the bottom of the tank, and you can visibly see the gauge dropping.
Now, both sides of the energy policy debate have a really solid point here. President Petro is making a very deliberate, defensible bet. He halted new oil exploration and banned fracking with the reasoning that the world is rapidly decarbonizing and Colombia shouldn't bet its future on depleting fossil fuels. Makes sense, right? But the brutal reality on the other side of the argument is simply timing. The replacement engine, renewables and new industries, just isn't scaling fast enough right now to fill a massive $15 billion hole left by declining oil exports. That brings us to Section 3, the shadow economy. We have to soberly analyze the one major export that doesn't make the official charts, but actively funds half of the country's instability and directly poisons legal investment. And we're going to look at this strictly as an economic phenomenon of supply, demand, and state capacity.
Okay, Take a look at this staggering number, 2,664 metric tons. That represents the potential cocaine production in Colombia in 2023. That marks a massive 53% increase over the previous year, and it continues an unbroken decade-long streak of rising, record-breaking output. Colombia isn't just a player in this market anymore. It now accounts for 60 to 70% of the entire world's production.
If we look at the pure economics of this, it isn't simply a moral issue. It's a grim story of agricultural productivity filling a vacuum where the state simply does not exist. Just imagine being a farmer, hours away from a paved road with absolutely no legal buyers around. Armed groups step into that void. They coerce the population, sure, but they also guarantee a reliable price for a crop that is incredibly productive and plague-resistant. This illicit economy generates billions in hard currency, but it fuels the very armed groups that are the primary drivers of rural instability. And that instability is absolute poison to the legal foreign investment the country so desperately needs.
Moving on to Section 4, the institutional meltdown. Leaving the rural vacuum behind, we enter a far more polite kind of chaos in the capital, a total breakdown of macroeconomic governance. This is where the structural foundations of the state's finances really started to shake.
So the government invoked an escape clause to suspend its legally binding fiscal rule for 3 years, spending a record 22.9% of GDP. And the markets? Well, they reacted exactly as you'd expect. The 2025 deficit widened to 6.2%, which is the second worst among 41 surveyed countries globally. With debt projected to peak at 64% by 2027, rating agencies S&P and Moody's downgraded Colombia's credit rating into junk territory. This immediately triggered a huge spike in borrowing costs, creating this incredibly dangerous doom loop of rising debt and vanishing investor confidence.
And this sequence of events right here brilliantly illustrates an unprecedented constitutional booby trap. Check this out. With inflation missing its 3% target for a fifth straight year in late 2025, the government just bypassed negotiations and decreed a massive 23.7% minimum wage hike. To fight the resulting inflation pressure, the independent central bank pushed rates way up to 11.25%. In protest, the finance minister literally walked out of the boardroom, depriving it of the quorum required to legally meet. The central bank referee and the government team captain are basically no longer willing to share the same field.
Which leads us straight into Section 5, the Washington shock. You see, all of this internal pressure, the deficit, the bank fight, the shifting exports, it was all somewhat survivable, right up until the external world stopped cooperating and a massive diplomatic earthquake hit.
Triggered directly by those massive cocaine production numbers we talked about earlier, the United States completely shattered a nearly 30-year partnership by officially decertifying Colombia's counter-narcotics efforts. Almost overnight, one of Washington's oldest regional anchors was slotted onto a list right alongside rogue nations like Afghanistan, Bolivia, Myanmar, and Venezuela. No one saw a shift this drastic coming so fast.
Again, we really must look impartially at both arguments here. Washington took extreme measures, placing the sitting president on a sanctions list, introducing 10% tariffs, and heavily increasing military presence with 10,000 troops in the Caribbean. Their argument is that Colombia just let the drug supply explode. Bogotá, however, correctly points out that the U.S. is heavily meddling in internal politics, and they argue that the demand engine driving this entire illicit trade sits primarily right there in U.S. cities. Both sides are presenting real truths here, making this a highly volatile live variable for Colombia's economy moving forward.
Finally, we arrive at the crossroads, the 2026 inheritance. Let's pull all these threads together to see what actually awaits the winner of the upcoming May 2026 election.
The core takeaway from this explainer is that institutions like fiscal rules and central bank independence are completely invisible right up until the exact moment they break. The next administration is inheriting an economy that is simultaneously super resilient and incredibly fragile. Just think about the stakes. They're facing a required 3-point GDP fiscal austerity adjustment, a fractured and deadlocked central bank, and a crucial U.S. alliance that literally has to be rebuilt from the studs. And all of this while relying on economic resilience that's propped up by a fragile, informal consumption boom. As Colombia waits to find out if the cafe or the chaos wins out, I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. You've seen the underlying strengths of the people, and you've seen the deep institutional fractures of the state. When an economy runs two totally opposite stories at the exact same time, which one ultimately writes the ending? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.